Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. In extending his invitation to me to participate in today's conference, Wes Johnson asked me to share with you some of my experiences in the often arcane and always risky world of regulatory trench warfare. In a nutshell, my advice to you is what any veteran would be to new recruits in the trenches. Minimize your exposure, keep your head down, and stay alert. This was always the Rogers strategy for the many, many pitched battles that we fought to break down the regulatory fortress around Canada's telecom monopolies and the barriers to vertical integration that for so long prevented cable companies from expanding into broadcasting. Actually, even before that, preventing cable companies from existing. When I went to work for Ted Rogers 45 years ago, he had one radio station and a cable license. We had a few thousand subscribers. And cable was, that was it at that point. Cable was little more than a gleam in some engineer's eye. Cell phones didn't exist, neither did the internet. And if someone had predicted that one day we, all 20 or 30 of us, would be challenging Bell for a monopoly in the phone business, I'm sure everyone would have laughed us out of the room. Compared to where the solar power industry is today, Rogers was nowhere. For your startup business, to get to where you are in the stage that Rogers has reached in a highly regulated environment is no mean feat, but we did it. We and other competitors carved out a place for ourselves against the well-entrenched monopolies. If we did it, you can do it too, and you will do it. When it comes to survival, though, in a regulatory world, the first general piece of advice for you is be a realist. Set aside all your wishful thinking and bury your emotions in the deepest hole. Wishing God would reach out in her firmament and spirit the regulators and bureaucrats away is just a waste of time. So hating the regulators, though I confess every once in a while I still indulge in this, is a therapeutic rant. Fact of life number one. Regulators can be defined as people who may best be relied on to make wise, intelligent, and statesmanlike decisions after first exhausting all the other alternatives. Fact number two, regulators aren't going anywhere. They're appointed to regulate. They're obligated. They're obliged to regulate by law. They have nothing else to do but regulate, and to make matters worse, they like doing it. You, on the other hand, have businesses to run. The last thing in the world you want to do is lawyer up, file tons of paper, participate in boring hearings, and wait months and months for decisions that at times will make you crazy. Get over it. The regulators are here to stay. And what you have to do is be better at playing the game than the incumbent for monopolies. And to do that, you're best to start with feeling some sympathy, hard to do, but some sympathy for the regulators. They are obliged by law to serve the public interest. The public wants a secure and affordable source of electricity. Regulators are tasked with ensuring that they have it. You don't do that by abandoning a proven formula, no matter how flawed, and jumping on every latest thing bandwagon that comes down the road. So fulfilling their public interest mandate while making the long transition to greater dependence on market forces has compelled regulators to develop a sense of balance more typical of high-wire performers than public servants. It's a tough act. There's no safety net. Disaster constantly threatens, particularly when the unexpected reaches out and gives the high wire a little shake. The unexpected can come in many forms. Look, for example, the earliest days of cable before it was dragged unwillingly and unceremoniously before the regulatory umbrella. 45 years ago, all you needed to start a cable operation was a $25 license from the Department of Transport, enough money to roll out the network, and the stamina to work 24/7. Back then, Ted had the $25, and he certainly had the work ethic, but not enough money to go it alone. So he teamed up with the broadcasting interests owned by the Eatons and the Bassetts, the CFTO network. A year after Ted got started, the government created the CRTC. It in turn created the equivalent of the Berlin Wall between broadcasting and cable. Overnight, the Rogers-Eatons-Bassett partnership became the regulatory equivalent of the, quote, the love that dares not speak its name. Ted suddenly found himself back with his back to the wall. Rogers had to find a backer or a backer with unlimited faith or fold its tent. For the first time in history, in its history, and by no means the last, the Commission forced a Canadian entrepreneur to abandon a well-crafted business plan to plunge headfirst into damage control. At Rogers, we couldn't devote scarce resources to expansion and innovation. We were in full-time survival mode. So I'm certain the Commission's intentions were honorable. It worried about the dangers of corporate concentration. It wanted to ensure a diversity of voices. These are all very laudable goals. But I would argue that separating broadcasting and distribution to achieve those goals, the Commission chose far too blunt a regulatory instrument. And of course, today, they're together again. So, didn't really pan out the way they wanted it to. Ironically, of course, the force split energized us at Rogers, and it inspired the creation of the Rogers corporate network as we know. But it could just as easily have left us dispirited and financially ruined. It was very close. Outright bans restrict entrepreneurial activity and deprive both the system and consumers of the many benefits of investment and opportunity. But prohibitive regulation, as the current reaction to Uber in say Toronto, demonstrates that it's far from dead. So over the years, Rogers has tried to bridge the artificial chasm that the CRTC has dug between broadcasters and distribution. And almost always we were rebuffed. We saw them as complementary. When the Toronto's ethnic TV station went bankrupt, finally, we were allowed to get into broadcasting. It was crazy. I make these points not to complain or criticize, but to suggest that the artificial barriers created that create artificial environments, and artificial environments tend to fall apart fast in the face of real-world pressures. Regulation is most effective when it's light-handed. It works best when it applies pragmatic solutions to real problems. It succeeds when it encourages innovation and enterprise through permissive, as opposed to restrictive policies. So you can succeed in converting your industry regulator into a more market-oriented decision maker, but you must not delude yourself into thinking that a sea change can be brought on overnight. It will be a step-by-step approach, and unfortunately, some of those steps, as far as you're concerned, will be backwards. No one ever gets everything they want from the regulator. It's a bit of a give and take, a bit like Moses when he was summoned to the top of Mount Sinai by God. He descended with his commandments, and he told his followers, you know, I've got good news and bad news. I got him down to 10, but adultery's still in there. Over the years, I have learned that you cannot push the regulator. You can nudge it. To do that, you need the best regulatory team you can afford. So if you're a new entrant that can't afford these resources to regulatory matters, be glad you have an association that does your battles for you. And support the Canadian Solar Association in any way you can. Even when you find yourself disagreeing with some of the aspects or policies, tactics, try as hard as you can to keep those differences within the family. There's nothing an incumbent monopoly wants better than a family squabbles that its competitor that it can publicize and exploit. And if you can afford to participate in the regulatory process, let me suggest a few tactics that have served Rogers well over the years. First, as much as possible, make it easy for the regulator to do what you want. If you know it won't make huge changes, don't ask for them. Suggest baby steps, and make sure the record you help build in any process contains ample evidence that those steps are in the direction that should logically be taken. Back in the days when we thought time was ripe to open the long-distance telephone market to competition, Rogers realized that it would not be very convincing to the regulator to say, well, let us chop off a piece of the incumbent's lunch because we were hungry. Instead, we based our case on what is best for the consumer. And we spent a lot of time working with consumers' groups to ensure that we had the story right. And when it came to presenting oral evidence, we joined forces with the consumers' associations and relied on them to build the record that the decision makers found impossible to ignore. Just having the best idea, though, is no guarantee success, but your chances improve markedly when you find a convincing way to get it on the record. Similarly, effective strategists in any regulatory proceeding almost always have a fallback position. You may be right in thinking your industry could use a large dose of competition, but never delude yourself about one thing. The incumbents you are up against may not believe in marketplace competition, but when it comes to the regulatory process, there are no more competitive people on the earth than those people that work for the incumbent's regulatory team. Their inherent weakness, however, is that although they're well-financed and highly experienced, they only have one thing to say, and that is no. So if you reduce your message to the word yes more often than not, the regulator will take the safe option of agreeing with the incumbent, or will try and work out some sort of compromise that leads to a decision that no one likes. If you can present a third way, an alternative to yes or no, often the regulator will embrace it with both arms. But lack of a fallback position can have fatal consequences. So in closing, I don't want to leave you with the impression that one must always be ready to add water to wine, to compromise, no matter how high the price is. Rarely, but sometimes, an issue comes along that is so fundamental, so divisive, that it must be rejected out of hand. Sometimes, however, there is no alternative but just fight in your corner. Ladies and gentlemen, as Rogers many years ago, you're on the threshold of a brave new world of regulation. The stars have aligned to practically guarantee your success. You have a product that is greener than green, that has no negative side effects, no nuisance factors, no downsides that I can see of any kind. You have already established as the industry's new standard, you're already established as the industry's new standard bearer, and as it hit home to me forcefully a couple of weeks ago when I flew over the massive solar presence in the Mojave Desert, you're certainly here to stay. Climate change and the urgent need for a completely new energy strategy makes your success almost inevitable, but that does not mean you should be complacent. I was the founding chairman of the Sierra Club of Ontario, served on the board of a lot of conservation groups. I know what it's right. I know what it's like to be on the right side of an environmental protection issues and still lose. So whatever you do, never give up, never give up. Keep advocating. Keep fighting in your corner. Represent your interests and demonstrate as often as possible as necessary that it is in the public interest, and your interests and the public are one and the same. Don't expect regulators to figure that out on their own, however. It is up to you to shine the light on the message. So I've enjoyed myself this morning, and thank you very much for inviting me to join you, and good luck in the trenches. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm sure all of us were struck, as I was, by the parallels between what you helped lead Rogers through and what we're experiencing ourselves here in this Ontario market. And don't know if I'm more pleased that our membership was able to hear this message, or the fact that I know that several representatives from our own regulator, the OEB, the Ontario Energy Board, are here today, and I'm sure they're carrying away a couple of messages from this talk this morning. Mr. Lind has kindly agreed to take a couple of questions from the floor if anyone has one. There's a microphone here in the middle of the room if you'd like to ask a question. But maybe I'll start with one if you don't mind. One of the real parallels, Mr. Lind, that I saw when you were talking about that separation between distribution and broadcasting, it's almost very much like the separation that we're experiencing now between generating electricity and distributing it. And one of the things that we're finding with solar electricity, and one of the challenges that the regulators are having, is the role that the traditional utilities play, the distributors of electricity play, when they have this very distributed generation being deployed on people's businesses and homes. So suddenly the role of the distributor becomes in question. So that parallel struck me, and I wondered if you could just elaborate a little bit on what you went through there.
Well, it is a similar situation. And I don't know, that's up to the regulator to figure out how to solve it. But Clearly, if the consumer interest is there, and you can demonstrate that there's no or limited harm to the existing distributor, then I think your task is a lot easier. I mean, I remember years ago when a cable company was set up, Bell said to the company, to the regulator, well, they're not going to use our poles. Actually, they weren't their poles. They paid for them, but they're on public rights of way. They're a public thing. So we argued, we'll pay our fair share to put our cables on the wires, but no way that they should control them. We'll pay to have them. And they said, no, that's not the way it's going to be. If you want to put your wires on our telephone poles, you could pay to put them up, and then we'll own them. And you could see that was an argument that wasn't going to fly. But so they're always the regulated incumbent monopoly will come up with all kinds of good reasons why they should preserve the existing system. And your task is to persuade the regulator that you can work the existing system, but you just want to add on and be incremental, and that's the way it ought to work.
I think we have a couple of questions here, so I'll ask you to field them.
Hey there. Thank you for a wonderful speech. My name is Tor Valenza from Unthink Solar. I'm actually down from the States, but a lot of these issues, I think, translate down there as well. And I was wondering how do you involve the public, and does that matter in terms of swaying regulators? I mean, how do you activate them? Or does it even matter that we spend resources to activate the public to change regulators' minds?
Oh, I really think the public has to get involved in your fight, and it's important that it does. But equally important is the fact that you have a product that is easy to demonstrate that it's good. So it's not like our company. We had cable TV, but that was sort of an ethereal thing as to how it got into the home. The solar panels themselves convince people that energy is there and can be used for the home. So you have an easier job in that respect. But you absolutely have to involve the public, both as a user and as a force for change. They've got to speak out. They've got to say that this is a good thing. They've got to tell their elected officials that this is what they want.
Was there a parallel for your industry can you give an example of how you activated them to change their minds in some way?
Well, certainly on the poll matter, that was something that we couldn't possibly move the public on. But for example, on long-distance competition, we argued that the consumer wanted lower prices, and that we could demonstrate that competition, because we've had it in other environments, would lower long-distance prices. So we got the people who were most concerned about long-distance prices to to get involved in this thing and to get active. And they did, with their own small business associations and things like that. They started feeding into the system. So it wasn't us. It was them. And they were fighting the battle for us.
Thank you very much.
Again, thank you very much for a wonderful speech. Looking back on some of those big regulatory battles that Rogers fought over the years, what's the balance between money, lawyers, and persistence? Like, is there a balance in there that over the years you're just like, yeah, it's a pretty straightforward formula? And just one other thing, any idea what the 11th commandment was that didn't make it?
No, but it had something to do with Bell Canada. I know that. I think I think that's enough said.
Well, I just want to start with a thank you. I was really inspired by your talk, and the story of perseverance, and also the being in the trenches and being a realist. And then as you were ending your talk, you talked about our future being bright. We're doing something that's really needed. Talking about climate change and hearing about your involvement with the Sierra Club. I've been listening to CBC Radio. We had Preston Manning speaking last week. David Miller they were both talking about carbon pricing. So there's also this organization, the Eco-Fiscal Commission. I'm not sure if you've bumped into that one, but Preston Manning is speaking about our need. We had industry experts up here from the wind, the solar, and hydro, and the electrical regulator, or electrical association, all saying that in terms of policy, would join us all together as some sort of price on carbon. And I'm wondering if you could speak to that, if you've been thinking about pricing carbon at all.
No, I really can't. I'm not. I've been involved with Ontario Hydro. I've been involved with Union Gas. I've been on the Ontario, what is it called, the Energy, not the board, but the Energy Corporation or something. Obviously, carbon is the factor that most people are worried about, and it's a very complicated matter. I got some idiotic email yesterday from somebody who claimed that the Icelandic eruptions would generate more CO2 than all our plants going full steam for the next 20 years or something. It's just insane stuff that's around out there somewhere. So I think people are generally now realizing that is the number one problem, and that so I think, as I said, I think history's on your side. I think it's moving in that direction, all right. And but honestly, when you get into the intricacies of the carbon argument, it's, man, you can get lost very easily. So I think, generally speaking, people understand that climate change is as a result of too much carbon, and so I think it's moving safely in your direction. And just to answer the last question, I don't think it's always a matter of the best lawyers and the best, because at Rogers we had some good people, but we didn't have the resources. we didn't have anything near the resources that Bell and the other companies had to oppose us. And then when the broadcasters were campaigning to not let distant signals come into this market, again, they had the best lawyers, they had the best regulatory team by far, but with the consumer's interests on our side. So, you know, that's how you balance it out. Particularly when you, like we had very limited resources. We had very few people. We could afford to do this. And they had everybody. But, you know, if you can align your interests with the consumer, then you're halfway there anyway. That's one thing that I would stress. Never overlook the customer, the consumer, because that's the one that you've got to shape your arguments for to the regulator. Okay?
Mr. Lind, thank you very much. Thank you for sharing your time and thank you for sharing your time and your experience and your wisdom with us. Very much appreciated.